Welcome to KBM 8.3 Assessment Plan Training. You'll notice that I've already opened up a test patient. You're welcome to use any patient you want while you're in the test system. You'll notice as I've scrolled to the bottom of your SOAP template, looking at the panel for the assessment and plan, you'll notice that you have the ability to access your assessments as well as use the Add or Update button. Both of those will take you to the assessments. You have access to My Plan, AP Details, which replaces our current terminology for plan details. You have your Lab Master, your Diagnostic and Referrals, Office Procedures. You have the ability to view your immunizations. You have the ability to look at a couple of new templates that physical therapy orders, as well as the health promotion plan and the ACO template. Selecting the assessment, you'll notice that we have a little bit different look and feel with similar functionality and some new added functionality. You still have the ability to review your billing diagnosis code history. A new added feature is programming that's been put into place to let you review when the date last addressed. You'll also notice that you have this button here to show your chronic conditions. By selecting Show Chronic Conditions, this is pulling over a list of chronic conditions from our 817 environment. You also have the ability to look at clinical problems. Clinical problems are, of course, your chronic conditions or tracked clinical problems. And we'll discuss this in a little bit more, but the clinical problems for intents and purpose for NextGen are related to SNOMED codes, and this in large part is a part of meaningful use. And then you have the ability to review your My Favorites. You have a diagnosis code lookup that will open up the diagnosis code lookup using NextGen search engine. And then you also have the ability to look at the IMO, which is the big blue pill shaped, and allow you to look at the new IMO. And at the bottom of your template, these are a listing of today's assessments. You also have this Add Assessment on one click. You'll notice that it's automatically populated as you open up each patient assessment page. This is the assumption that you're wanting to add all of the diagnosis codes that might be in the billing or the clinical history, that if with one click you would like to add it to your day's assessment. So we've gone ahead and made that the default. On the clinical problems are a large part a result of Meaningful Use Stage 2. And in Meaningful Use Stage 2, uses criteria that will allow an IT and EMR to provide consistent care among different providers and groups. This means electronic systems need to be able to talk to one another, and they need to be able to understand one another. So what they've done is they've converted over your clinical problems, which of course are your chronic conditions, to clinical problems that are tracked based on SNOMED. SNOMED CT is a system of nomenclature medicine that organizes computer collection of medical terms, codes, synonyms, and definitions, and it's considered to be one of the more comprehensive multi-language clinical healthcare terminologies in the world. The purpose is to ensure that meanings that are used in healthcare information and to support the effective clinical recording of data with the overall goal of improving patient care, obviously. Using SNOMED CT enables providers and electronic EMRs to talk to one another. So you'll notice that all your clinical problems, while in the past your chronic conditions were linked to ICD-9 codes, clinical problems or chronic conditions in the new version will be linked to a SNOMED code. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is adding in a new diagnosis code. So you'll notice you can add your new diagnosis code from assessment code lookup, or you can add it for the IMO. Ideally, the IMO is much quicker. It's much more efficient to add a diagnosis code. So I'm going to select the IMO, and I'm going to type in a diagnosis code of gout, and I'm going to search. And you'll notice quickly that I have an ICD-9 code that populates, and if I select the plus button, You'll notice that because I have assessments highlighted at the lower portion of the screen, that it's going to add that to my today's assessments. So I'm going to go ahead and click the plus sign, and you'll notice that that adds it to the today's assessment, whatever it is I selected. And then when I hit save and close, that's now added to the assessment for today. At the same exact time, I also have the ability to add gout to either a chronic problem list or to add it to my clinical problems. So I'm going to highlight gout, and I'm going to mark it as being a chronic condition. By highlighting it and marking it as being chronic, it's going to show up in my show chronic only conditions. And if I were to ask it to link it and add it to my clinical problems, then I can add it to my clinical problems list by selecting add or update. This is where the SNOMED mapping comes into play. The system, we've made every attempt to try and use a general equivalency mapping behind the scenes in order to automatically link it to a clinical problem. In this case right here is trying to find a SNOMED code that's associated with the diagnosis code that I selected. And you can scroll through the list to select whichever one you want. I don't actually want to add that to my clinical problems, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel out, but I wanted to make sure that you knew how to do that. If I've added a diagnosis code to my today's assessment and I've added in error, I can highlight it and then I can hit remove. And it's asking me whether I'd like to remove the assessment, and I'm going to select yes. To go back in and to select a new code, I type in the appropriate information. And this time I'm going to select gout, which is 274.9. That was the diagnosis code that I had intended. And now when I select save and close, you'll notice that I have gout. I would like to add that to my chronic problems, so by selecting chronic problems and selecting add or update, you'll notice when I select the show chronic conditions, that is add that to my chronic problems. The chronic problems, as you're seeing with this functionality, is comparable to what you're seeing in your current 817 version. So this will allow you to quickly look at any chronic conditions from your 817 environment and quickly use the diagnosis code in the last date address for moving forward on your documentation for many of your NTSP criteria and your STARS criteria. You'll also notice that because this is a clinical problem that I would like to track in the future, I'm going to go ahead and add that to my clinical problems. So if I'd like to add that to my clinical problems, I'm also going to have to link that to a SNOMED code, and I can do that very quickly by using my IMO. So if I were to select gout, and I'd select problems first, by selecting problem, that's letting them know that whatever I'm searching for, I'm going to add it into my problem list. Or if I select both, I can come in here and add it to both my assessments for today, and I can add it into my problem list. So I'm going to select gout, and I'm going to select search, and I'm going to select the 274.9. And you'll notice that gout is available for my assessments, and it's also been added to my problem list, but you'll notice that it also linked it to a SNOMED code. One of the benefits of the IMO is it will automatically link to a SNOMED when you choose that option. So gout has been added, and you'll also gout has been added to my clinical problems. That's the quickest way to add a chronic condition in your clinical problem list. So I'm going to go ahead and save it and close it. And you'll notice as I added in the 2 new diagnosis codes, those show up on the assessments. If I go back into the assessment and say, for instance, I wanted to add in a new diagnosis code, then I can add in multiple diagnosis codes at one time. And I'm going to select migraine, and by migraine I've just add that in to the day's assessment. Or I can come back in and I can type in gastritis and add that into my day's assessment. And then I can save and close. Remember, if one of those items needed to be added to my problem list, to my chronic conditions, then I can highlight it. And if I select mark chronic conditions here, it will add it to my chronic conditions that I have listed here. Or if I added it to my clinical problems, then I'll go ahead and add it to my clinical problems. Just remember that adding it to my clinical problems outside of the IMO is going to result in me mapping it to a SNOMED code. So I'm going to go ahead and select that option. And you'll notice that the SNOMED mapping pulls the information that's comparable to the diagnosis code that I've used. And I'm just going to select migraine because it's very general and broad. And then I'm going to say yes and yes. Unfortunately, there's a known glitch with NextGen. It requires you to select yes twice. I can also take gastritis, or maybe perhaps absence of menstrual cycle. And by clicking that one, I'm going to go ahead and add it into my assessments today. But if I wanted to add this to my favorites, I can highlight it, click this button, and add it to my favorites. And then you'll notice that the absence of menstrual cycle will show up in your My Favorites. You'll also notice that right above this clinical problem, there's a little note here that says mapping required. What that's letting me know is that there was a diagnosis code from chronic conditions from 817 that didn't map 100% into the clinical problems. We do have that general equivalency mapping behind the scenes that's trying to map it one-to-one, but occasionally you may find one that slips through. And if you would like to utilize the clinical problem area, select mapping required. And the first thing it's telling you right here is this is the one that didn't map. If you happen to have a clinical problem in your list, you could try to map it to an existing problem. But at this point in time, I don't have an existing problem that would map. So I'm going to smack the new problem, and sometimes it's just as easy as just typing in the description again. And of course, it pulled up a list of SNOMEDs comparable to the chronic condition that I had already entered based on the diagnosis code. And I'm going to select absence of menstruation, and then I'm going to go ahead and close it. And you'll notice now all of my chronic conditions are fully mapped into my clinical problems. And the view mappings, if it were highlighted red, that would mean that I would want to map them. And then, of course, you're now able to look at the date last address. While you don't actually have to use your clinical problems because we've given you a workaround with show chronic conditions, we do feel at some point in time that meaningful use will be something that Family Healthcare Associates will be active with. And starting now to go ahead and build that clinical problem list will be of importance. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close. And as you notice, I saved and closed. Then the new assessments that I've added to my assessments today will show up in the grid. I'm now going to go to the My Plan, and from your My Plan page, there weren't too many things that were changed. A couple of big changes, though. You'll notice that in our current version, you have the ability to add a new assessment, and if I selected and add a new assessment from this area over here, then it would take me to the assessment page to add in a new diagnosis code. They have removed it, and it's now right here just underneath today's assessment. So if I were to select Add Assessment, then it just takes me back to the Add Assessment page. From this same area, I can highlight an individual diagnosis code, and I can edit it. If I select Edit, it just takes me back to my assessment page. Or if I select Remove after I highlight one, then it literally would remove that diagnosis code. I don't want to remove the diagnosis code, but I do want to let you know it's there. Your order sets that you currently have saved, a lot of physicians use those order sets as a time saver, should have pulled over, so you shouldn't have any problems with it. Please make sure that you test it out. But you'll notice that I have the ability to highlight the individual code, and I'm going to order a CBC and a CMP, and maybe perhaps I'm going to do a vitamin B12. And I'll go ahead and place my order, and I'm going to process and submit. Placing the order, of course, puts it in the system in the orders management, the process and submit, send it to the harvest system to prepare that to go for the lab to process. I also have the ability to select another diagnosis code, and maybe perhaps on this diagnosis code I might want to do a BMP or maybe an occult, and based on this order set, then I'm going to avoid foods and eat smaller meals and elevate head of the bed. And you do have the ability to come in and add in any additional orders. So if I select add additional instructions, I can come down here and type, brat diet maybe. Or maybe perhaps I can say, clear liquids for next 24 hours. And we have been told, and I've tested it multiple times, that any of the instructions that you put in an additional order will generate and print on the document. We've had some difficulty in the past with that randomly not happening. And I do have the ability to provide a discrete field to document my follow-up times. But on this one right here, I just might want to type as needed. And then I'm going to go ahead and select OK. And I'll place my order. And because there's labs involved, then I'm going to go ahead and process and submit. And you'll notice that those have been processed. And then I can go ahead and continue ordering as I need to. And placing my order and process and submit. As I save and close, and while I don't have to save and close at this point in time, I wanted to make sure that you'll notice from your assessment page that this information continues to build based on all the orders on my assessment plan. Going back into the AP details, the AP details has changed somewhat, but you don't have to actually change your current workflow. If in the past you documented all your details on the patient plan, you can continue doing that. But NextGen's giving the opportunity to select an individual diagnosis code and to type in comments, impression comments, maybe perhaps differential diagnosis comments. You have the ability to type in plan details. And then you have the ability to type in provider comments. Remember that your provider detail comments will not print out on the patient plan, provided you provide that patient plan. You also have the ability to document a follow-up, and this follow-up, if you'll notice, links to the same exact table that you filled out on your My Plan page. And in this case, I'm just going to document maybe the follow-up time frame is 2 months, and then I'll go ahead and select OK, and then I can save and close it. Then I can go and I can select gastritis. Remember, you still have the ability to access my phrases. You can still manage those phrases, or you can use common phrases that might have been available in the past. And I'm going to go ahead and just select something from the common phrases list. And I'm really not paying any attention to what I'm selecting, but you'll notice that it continues to build. And I can still type whatever, type comments as needed. And then I can save and close it. You still have you'll notice as I save and close, I continue to build the information on my assessment plan. While I don't have to save and close, I did that just so you can see it. You still have the ability to look at your labs master. Your lab master will be, while it's not an exact duplicate as far as the layout, you have the same exact functionality you have in your current version. You still have the ability to select the child template. So if I were going to select an individual diagnosis code, I could still come in here and select what I'm going to order. I still have the ability to select the time frame that maybe perhaps I'm not going to do this today, but I'm going to do it 2 or 3 months in advance. And I could document whether that's just a routine or whether it's a fasting result. And then I can select place my order. Or you can go into those child templates Maybe perhaps select urine chemistries, and on the absence of menstruation, maybe perhaps I want to do something else. And while this wouldn't be normally something I'm going to put in there, I'm just going to go ahead and select a diagnosis code so I can put some additional labs on here. And you notice you're starting to see all the different labs that I've ordered in this grid. This will help you remember whether or not you've ordered the lab. But if you do select an individual lab and try and order something that's already been ordered, generally it'll throw a little note, a little error when you try and place your order telling you that it's already been placed. You have your ability to access your diagnostics. Your diagnostics area, you would just highlight the individual diagnosis code. And then in this case, I'm just going to order a CT of the head, and I'm going to do CT of the brain with, without. And if this were perhaps this was an extremity, I could select the side or the site. I can go ahead and place my order, and as I place that order, it's automatically giving me the option to send it to someone to process. Remember, you do have the ability to set up auto tasking to send it to your list of selected individuals as well. If you have any questions about auto tasking, let me know. I can go ahead and save it and close it, or I can go ahead and go to the referrals. And if I'd like to do a referral, then I can literally just select that I'm going to send them to a specialist. And maybe perhaps in this case, I'm going to send them to neurologist. And I can select the provider's name if I would like. I'll link that to a diagnosis code. In this case, I'm going to select migraine, and I'm going to tell them to evaluate and treat it. And then I can go ahead and add that. I can send it to the person that I want to process that. And then I can go ahead and close that. Or I can go to my office procedures and utilize any of the functions for the office procedures. You'll notice that I've started to compile a fairly large set of diagnosis codes for today. At the completion of your assessments, the assumption is that you'll want to submit your diagnosis codes and submit your billing. So you'll select the E&M coding. You can select that at the bottom of your template, or you still have the ability to access that from the top under Finalize. You'll notice that all the diagnosis code that I've selected for day shows. You also from this area have the ability to add one if you've realized that you've left one off at the last minute, and you can resort them by putting them in a different order. Remember, in the new version 8.3, you have the ability to use up to 12 billing codes opposed to the 8 billing codes in our current environment, and you have the ability to use unlimited support diagnosis codes. You still have to select the decision making. In this case, I'm going to select moderate to complex. And then you have the ability to either override the code by selecting the code that's appropriate for your visit, or you can select calculate the code. If you calculate the code, the system will automatically calculate the code that corresponds to the level of visit. In this case, it's just a 99211. But remember, I haven't put a review of systems. I didn't put any vital signs. I didn't put any medications in here. I didn't do a complete physical. I also have the ability from here to go ahead and submit my code, but when I submit my code, I have the ability to generate my document offline or to document it online. Offline is the default, so if I select submit code at this point in time, it'll generate that document and it'll just generate it offline, so I can go on and do my remaining portions of my work and maybe come back and look at it later on. If I were to select online, then it's going to submit the code right now. It's your preference as to which one, but offline will be the default, given the majority of the physicians would like to be able to go ahead and submit their code and then move on to continuing patient care. So you'll notice that submitted, and then within the next 2 or 3 minutes, then it'll actually show up in your history. But I do want to go ahead and generate the document, so I want you to have a general idea of what the information looks like in the assessment phase. And so I'm going to select preview so it generates now. And it usually takes about 10 to 12 seconds to generate the master. This is very comparable to the current production environment. And you'll notice that the information, when it populates on the master document, is a little bit different than what you have in the past. You'll find that some people have indicated it's a little bit easier to read because it's separated out and it's put everything in more of a grid look. But this will give you the information that you'll have, and then of course you'll scroll through and look at any chronic conditions that you address through the day. But this is the new master document. It's very comparable to what you have in your current environment. It's just laid out a little bit differently. That completes the training for assessment plan and finalizing office visit.